not reading that.
Okay, so you can start. Did you want to read? Do you have a quote? Do you want to read or not? It's okay. We'll start.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Today's topic is the Judge article, The Culture of Concentration. So Judge in this article, he's talking to us students, the students of his time, but to all students, to all of us, to try, there's this term that he was using, self-culture. And, I think when we just think of self-culture in everyday life, people think about, I want to have culture in my life. I want to, maybe people think about being really knowledgeable in certain literature or the arts or even some sciences, and try to culture our mind, culture our knowledge of some of these subjects, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in this article, Judge is talking about, these are all things from external sources, trying to, culture our personality with art, sciences, other things. These are all sources from outside of us. And he's getting us to ask, the questions like who or what is our focus of this self-culture, or this culture of concentration. And so what he's really talking about is something other than a personality. If we do, as I said, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And even, there's a term I remember when I was younger, I always aspired to this. There's a term for women called like Renaissance woman, where you could be really good in like so many different things. And like, they're considered this Renaissance woman. And what Judge is talking about, and we can do this, but when what is the purpose of us gaining this culture to ourselves? Like, what is really the purpose of doing this, and who is this for? How are we helping people by doing this? And who are we, what is ultimately, are we finding happiness with trying to gain all this information from without? So in this article, Doug is asking us to like really think of ourselves, and, in Theosophy, we have the idea of the 7 principles of the human. So he's getting us to think about which part of us are we thinking about when we're talking about this self-culture. And if we are in Theosophy thinking about some of our inner principles, not just the body, not just the mind, like the everyday mind, not just our emotions, not just our, sensual, like, aspirations for culture, maybe for art, for literature. But what else is there within us that is trying to, I guess, have a culture, or what are we trying to, who are we trying to identify with to actually understand many things? And he goes into it and saying like, yeah, you can study some of these things, sciences, arts, geology from without, but there's another aspect of us. If we focus on that, we actually get the truth of what's behind some of these things. And, if we study a person, he mentions, if we can know like parts of that person from studying them from without, or from just, sort of a basic psychological idea. But if we are actually identifying with these inner higher principles within ourselves, we can actually know the truth about these things. So he's asking us, well, who or what is the focus of our concentration? So we can go into, and one other thing, it's interesting because in this whole article, and there's a second part that we're not going to read today, but we'll get to maybe in another class. And it seems to me that it's sort of like a whole synopsis or maybe like the cliff notes of the voice of the silence. Because he's taking us through kind of this first part where we're figuring out who we're identifying with. And then a second part, we start to identify with that inner aspect of ourselves. And we're going through what they call, so the first hall is the hall of ignorance, when we don't first realize who we are, essentially. Then we start to realize that we go through this hall of learning, and then finally, he hints at hints at what the hall of wisdom is, if we go through all these the steps. And essentially, the steps that he's outlining, the steps that the voice of the silence outlines, the steps of Patanjali of Bhagavad-Gita are what's called Raja Yoga. And we're going to go into that too a little bit when we go through the article. And that's more of the science of yoga of the soul. So realizing this inner principle in ourselves that's really, the higher three principles, the higher manas, the buddhi, and the connected with Atma, which brings us to our intuitional side. And as we go, through this whole path of Raja Yoga and realizing that, then we get to what's wisdom. So let's read, let's see, the first couple of paragraphs are kind of explaining what I just mentioned about who are we actually trying to bring about within ourselves, who are we trying to realize? And he's noting that it doesn't need culture from without, but we have to go through these steps to bring up the essence of ourselves from within. So let's see. I'll read the first paragraph. So the very first paragraph, culture concentration. So in the pamphlet,
it's the very last one.
last one, yeah,
Page 31.
31. And then in the book, if you have the book, 319.
Yeah, this is just the first. He did two articles on the pamphlet. The first article.
Okay, so the term was generally in use to express what is included under the above title, self-culture. Now it seems to well enough express, for a time at least, a practice referred to by those who desire to know the truth. But in fact, it is inaccurate from a theosophical standpoint. For the self is held to be that designated in the Indian books as Ishwara, which is a portion of the eternal spirit enshrined in each human body. That is, in the Indian view, there is no doubt. The Bhagavad-Gita in chapter 15 says that an eternal portion of this spirit, having assumed life in the world of nature, in the world of life, attracts the heart and the five senses which belong to nature. Whatever body Ishwara enters or quits, it is connected with it by snatching those senses from nature, even as the breeze snatches perfumes from their very bed. This spirit approaches the objects of sense by presiding over the ear, the eye, the touch, the taste, and the smell, and also over the heart. And in an earlier chapter, the Supreme Spirit within this body is called the Spectator and Admonisher, Sustainer, Enjoyer, Great Lord, and also the highest soul. Again and again, the supreme eternal soul, even when existing within or connected with the body, is not polluted by the actions of the body. Elsewhere in these books, the same spirit is called the self, as in a celebrated sense, which in Sanskrit is Atmanam, Atmana Pasha, meaning raise the self by the self. And all through the Upanishads, where the self is constantly spoken of as the same as the Ishwara of the Bhagavad-Gita, Max Mueller thinks the word self expresses best in English the ideas of the Upanishads on this head. It therefore follows that such a thing as culture of this self, which in its very nature is eternal, unchangeable, and unpollutable by any action, cannot be. It is only from inadequacy of terms that students and writers using the English tongue are compelled to say self-culture. While when they say it, they admit that they know the self cannot be cultured. What they wish to express is such culture or practice to be pursued by us shall enable us, while on earth, to mirror forth the wisdom and fulfill the behests of the self within, which is all wise and all good. So essentially he's saying like what we don't need to, read and study things from without, but what we need to do is to develop our minds, our lower minds to be receptive to that which is within us. And by doing that, we'll go on to explain is this whole process of Raja Yoga.
Cool.
Does anyone have any questions or comments so far?
I have one.
Yes.
I think it's about time I learned who this Max Mueller is. Was he more known as a philosopher or psychologist?
Archaeologist, anthropologist, something like that.
Yeah, I think he was like more of like on Eastern, he wrote a whole series on Eastern philosophy.
I noticed a few books in his
Yeah.
life.
So he was like an expert
Kind
on.
of a predecessor.
Well, there's a whole set of Great Books of the East, I think it's called.
Right.
Sacred Books of the East. And it's like a 10-volume set. It was his life work. And it took him probably 25 years or so to put it together. But he translated and collected so much of the English language, of the Sanskrit literature as he could. But he was always kind of a skeptic. He was very much a German.
One part didn't have hands-on experience of what he
Well, he learned Sanskrit. He did
Oh.
yeah. He
Wow.
knew what he was doing. As a scholar, he's very good. But he just didn't, I don't think he had quite the total respect for the East that was due. It was very hard for Westerners to appreciate the East. Even people that were sympathetic, say A.P. Sinnett, that wrote Esoteric Buddhism and other works on Theosophy.
Didn't talk about
They were essentially Westerners, so they had a hard time. They did the best they could, but there's still flaws in their understanding. I think Max Mueller shared that.
Western Orientalists.
That's an oxymoron if there ever was.
Are there any hands-on?
I don't see.
No, okay. Okay. Yes, Louise.
Since I was a child, I remember I was 5 or 6 years old. When I went to school, because I went just 3 years to school. And when my teacher says, we just born, raise, and reproduce and die. And I say, no, it cannot be. We won't come here just for born, raise, and so on and so on. And I say, it has to be, see, I was 5 years old. And I said, must be another explanation in life. It's gonna be something and somewhere explain this. I didn't use those words, but I resonate in that way. And the other thing that I remember, I say, when I talk, when I speak, when I think, and when I do, it has a consequences. And the other thing, my mom, she took me to the church, the Protestant church in El Salvador. And the teacher, I was 6 years old, teacher says, you have to read the Bible, because the Bible is the word of God, it's only this book. And I said, hey, brother Louis, his name was Luis. I said, brother Louis, I think the Bible has the word of God, but there be another books that explain the same thing, but another books, another type of the same books. Says, no, this child has a devil in his, the spirit. They put me a hand in my. But see, since I remember since I was a child, I resonated like this. You know, when I came here, I said, this was the one that when I came to the lodge.
Yeah.
This was the place where they had to answer all my questions since I was a child.
Yes.
You know.
Well, when you mentioned like, the church and, the word of God, and, we know when we talk about it in Theosophy that in religion like that, and also, people that like are in different programs to get rid of some different addictions, they say, some things they say are like, just resign yourself to this higher power. But in Theosophy, and what this is getting us to realize is that we have that higher power within us. And by self-induced and self-devised efforts, we can connect with that and like overcome, addictions or overcome different mental issues. If we're ready for that. If we're ready and open for that, and it, entails responsibility too, taking responsibility for these things.
Yeah.
On that note specifically, like it does seem to me that when people hit like rock bottoms and like certain addictions, it does seem like it's a jolt, like their higher spirit or nature wakes them up, jolts them out of it. And it does seem, to me at least, it seems like these programs are not necessarily the ones that help them. They're like the manifestation, they're like the effect of them waking up.
Mm.
Like it's like reality is just rising up to meet them sort of waking up in a sense.
Right,
It
yeah.
feels like to me. So under that question, like I do have like, it does seem that like the Buddha and other, or at least the Buddha says like it's all in your mind, so you don't need to sort of, as far as like stuff like psychoactives, that giving sort of these religious experiences, like you don't necessarily need all that. But wouldn't it be that if you are having a certain waking up, would that be a symbol? Like, would that sort of experience be a symbol, a mirror reflecting itself back at you?
What do you mean by that?
The waking up?
Yeah, like say like, yeah, for example, you're around a certain shaman or tribe, and that experience comes about. So it gives you this religious experience, but through a psychoactive. Would we consider that karmically a symbol, like you were supposed to experience that at that point? Do we get my question?
I get
Yeah.
the question. It's kind of hard to know, really. I mean, everything happens under karma, but you're taking a choice, because I've read, I haven't done it. I've known people that have gone through it, people have done ayahuasca.
That's the one I'm specifically talking
Yeah,
about.
and I've also read about, ibogaine, which is an African root similar to that they use in Europe and in Mexico.
The scary ones.
Well, yeah, it's a psychoactive. And it's like 98% effective on addiction, but the thing with it is, you have to do it under certain conditions, but what it does, it's like, the people that do it, it goes, take it, do it under supervision. It's, say you're 35 years old, it says it's like doing 35 years of psychoanalysis, and you can't leave the room in that 2, 3 hour, 4 hour period. And not only that, like we all make decisions throughout our life, and you affect people in ways you don't know. And then how that affects them affects other people. Specifically with Bible game, with the people I've read about, they said you experience all of that. So whatever I've done to you, I know not only what I've done, I know how it made you feel, what it made you do, and how that affected the people around you. So normally, when we go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and we try to work through the issue, we slowly bring things up and go through it. But with that, and for most people, it's very successful, but it's very, very intense. So your question is, karmically, it's karmically, but it's happened karmically because first off, you're aware of it. Second off, you choose to do it. Can you handle the psychological effect it's going to have by going through that? And some people, they can't. Most people, they can. And the difference with that and Raja Yoga is it's a passive way to enter this state of consciousness. And depending on the purity of what you're taking, is going to also have an effect. Because people have the same effect, with doing LSD. A lot of people, that's what brought them on a path to study other answers than what Western science and the various religions bring you to. But some people psychologically snap, or they experience things in that state that we might consider just being kind of locked in the astral plane, where you're experiencing the thoughts and the deeds of other people in humanity, of all the evil stuff that happens.
It also be like a trigger to some stuff like latent, mental kind of emotional disease.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, and it doesn't. The thing is that you don't know until that you take that step.
Right, so it seems it's almost like a casino in a way, but it can be positive.
Yeah, I mean, it's like from the cultures that it came from, it was done under very specific circumstances. Like in guidance, like native tribes, in America had their peyote that they used, purified mescaline that they used, but it was done under a certain ritual and presentation. Also, you were surrounded by people that have already gone through that. First off, usually you did it like going from teenager to adulthood.
Rite of passage.
A life passage thing. It was a vision quest.
Yeah.
And for a lot of cultures, that their separation between the inner world and the outer world is not as defined as ours. So they already experience some of this stuff in their normal dreams, in their normal, like having deja vu experiences, having where intuitions come to them, and they use that as a guidance as opposed to using other ways to make decisions. So in certain cultures, you're kind of from your birth, you're kind of prepared to take this step. Our culture is a little bit different. So depending on your psychological makeup, which most of us don't know, a lot of people don't even realize they had trauma till they get into till they they go to see a psychiatrist or something in their 30s or 40s, when they realize, no way, I completely forgot this event happened, because that's a way for your mind to deal with something. It's very shocking or painful, or you don't really get it. So that's why, people go into therapy and then they realize, wait a minute, I was abused by 3 different people when I was a little kid, but I didn't even know what that was. And that's how you do, your body has a very strong coping mechanism. So your question is if it's possible. And some people, people do it with mushrooms. But the effect is like, how real is the effect? And you could say, in meditation, you're going to experience some similar effects because, Kelly mentioned the hall of learning, which is really the astral plane, which is the general thought plane of humanity, collective. So you see all the stuff that happens in the news, and you can see on the internet, the tragedies that happen among people. That's where it actually plays out. Then there's the plane where it's stored as to what people want to do, how people did it. We don't get all the gory details, so you might be confronted with it, or based on your nature, you might pass through that stage very quickly, not be caught in it, and reach a stage of the Akashic realm, which is truth and the higher thought.
But that's the thing with, doing something like ayahuasca or psychedelic, like you said, you're thrust into it, and if you don't have the guidance, you haven't had any experience, and many things could happen. Whereas with like the Raja Yoga, you're, in the guidance of the teachings, you go step by step, and they, throughout Blavatsky gives warnings about things like in the, place of the silence, beware of the lower cities. So when you're going through this, you kind of have, the guidance of what could happen. And, we're going to get to that too, even he talks about different aspects, what can happen. So when you're doing it this way, you're going slowly, step by step, but you're under guidance and you're doing it yourself with some knowledge and experience, step by step, rather than just being thrust into it. Yes,
and that's expressed briefly in the three objects. Because first, it offers that to form that nucleus of brotherhood of humanity in your mind. So somehow, by studying and practicing, you develop the idea of brotherhood, good feeling for everybody. Then comes the studying, and then last comes the developing of the psychic powers, or the uncovering of the psychic powers latent in ourselves as a nature. So that comes third. In a way, in this way, it means that they're not separate, but as you begin first with, the feeling of brotherhood, but really from your hearts. Then we might say that this way that Theosophy presents is a natural way rather than an artificial manner. Because the artificial way, it only takes you so far, then you have, as expressed, many dangers that you are not prepared for. In Theosophy, you begin to prepare yourself. So when you get there, you know how you have the skills to fight on the enemies in a way. And that's all expressed in the Bhagavad-Gita, in the words of the science, one of the books in the Bhagavad-Gita, and so on and so forth.
Now, when I got out of college and I moved here, I met a woman who was a natural psychic. And you'd think, wow, she must really have a lot of stuff together. She had some stuff together, but her life was very difficult because you're like an open antenna, and not specifically to everyone all the time, and she could control it because to a certain extent she could control it. But when she met people, it's gonna talk about like what the article talks about. We meet people and we see them and we talk to them and we get an understanding about them. And she would know the nature right off the bat. And she would not only know the nature, she could see things that they did that other people didn't want her to know they did. And so it was difficult, she had a difficult life. And when I met her, she was already in her 70s. And because she was born with it, her mom didn't have it, her grandmother had it. So her grandmother kind of guided her as she grew up. But, we think having these extra powers would be really good, which they are in a lot of ways. But there's also a heaviness to dealing with it, and if you can turn it on and off and have that control, which more, Raja Yoga starts to develop those tools with you, then it's probably a little safer. But, everyone's got to make the choice. I've known people that have done ayahuasca, it really improved their life. I've known a few people that did LSD and it was no big deal other than a trip. And I knew a few people that bugged right out, they snapped. And so that's the thing when we're dealing with psychology and dealing with our soul's collected karma, because that's really what you're dealing with. When you go into these states of consciousness, it could be just this lifetime that you're presented with, but it also could be things from previous lifetimes that you see that this is why you're in this life and this is why this stuff is happening, because this is who you were and what you did before. And you don't know what you're going to confront, so you confront it, till you're in there.
People reset his hand.
When I came here, I started hearing the secondary constitution. But little by little, I understand that it's not a aim to learn the secondary constitution and the risk that you confront one body with the other body and the effect that this produces, not knowing the information that has the secondary constitution. For instance,
The real advantage of knowing, at least from my views, of knowing the septenary constitution is that you realize that you have different ways that you experience, but you're not conscious of all of that experience. And so I can give you the keys to my new car, and you've driven a car, for years. And I say, here's the keys, take it for a drive. It's a brand new car. You can work the accelerator, you can probably get it started. There's certain things you can do, but there's a bunch of stuff that you don't know how to do. You go to turn the radio on, it doesn't go on. The GPS comes on when you don't want it. There's all different buzzers that happen because they're too close and that, all this stuff happens. You've been driving a car for years, but until you know how all the gadgets work, you can't really operate that car till it's full use. With the septenary constitution, it gives us kind of an understanding of our own vehicles, and that part of our vehicles are just for this time, but we actually have soul wisdom, and if we can reach that, it's going to be this experience in life is going to be way more meaningful. We're going to create less problems, and we're going to have a better life experience because we're going to know more of who we really are. And to me, that's the real benefit of the septenary constitution. It's not a fearful thing. It's just being able to understand how this works. And when can I operate from my highest perspective?
Yeah, that was like another question when, thinking about who we're actually talking about and the self that we're focusing on. And, the one question I used, do we ever meditate on the subsidiary aspects of ourselves, like our astral, like the prana, like our minds that's like experienced many lifetimes through many personalities. Like if we're trying to meditate on that mind that's gone through many lifetimes, many personalities, how are we identifying with that part of ourselves? Berto, did you have something?
Well, following with you, here is the term Ishwara is presented. So that's an idea of how to have that direct communication, we might say, without parting ourselves, because we know this is Ishwara, it's an aspect of every human being, of humanity. It's that we might say that part that takes a form or a body in each life. So therefore, we do have the chance that somehow we will get direct, or we might be getting sometimes, I don't know when, or in dreams, this direct communication without part of ourselves. That is in this part is called Ishwara.
And what you mentioned earlier, the three objects, first of all, we develop this love and compassion for all humanity, for, all sentient beings, universal brotherhood. And, you mentioned like the paramitas, which is like paramount to beginning this path, to have that within us to start. And that, as Blavatsky just says, is like the most protective, like ultimate compassion, charity. Having these virtues are the most protection for us going along this path.
James,
Can I read the definition in the glossary of Ishwara?
Yeah.
Okay, Ishwara, the Lord or the personal God, divine spirit in man, lit, sovereign, independent existence. A title given to Shiva and other gods in India. Shiva is also called Ishwara Deva or sovereign Deva.
So what does that mean to you?
He's here. It's right here. That's the Shiva's here. I don't have to go anywhere. Don't need to talk to any pope or cardinal or priest or
Is
anything.
the logos, isn't it? The logo.
yeah, yeah.
Is the Christ also?
Yeah.
The Christ with you. It's many different terms and mean the same thing.
Okay, so let's read some more. The next paragraph on 320, that one I could go, it's important because he explains that this self-culture, either outwardly learning of different things is actually kind of something selfish, which in Theosophy, we learn that part, like universal brotherhood, that doing these things is not, it's for ourselves, but to help others ultimately, to help all of humanity. So we can,
We're on page 32.
yeah.
32 and
Yeah, but so, does anyone want to read that next paragraph as the use of this term self-culture?
I will. Yes. Oh, does it? Did I hear that?
Sure. So as the use of this term, self-culture, demands a constant explanation, either outwardly declared or inwardly asserted to, it is wise to discard it altogether and substitute that which will express the practice aimed at, without raising a contradiction. For another reason also, the term should be discarded. That is, that it assumes a certain degree of selfishness. Or if we use it as referring to something that we only do for ourselves, we separate at once between us and the rest of the human brotherhood. Only in one way can we use it without contradiction or without explanation, and that is by admitting we selfishly desire to cultivate ourselves, thus at once running against a prime rule in theosophic life, and one so often and so strenuously insisted on. The idea of personal self must be uprooted. Of course, as we will not negative this rule, we thus again have brought before us the necessity for a term that does not arouse contradictions. That new term should, as nearly as possible, shadow forth the three essential things in the action, that is, the instrument, the act, and the agent, as well as the incitement to action, or knowledge itself, the thing to be known or done, and the person who knows. This term is concentration. In the Indian books, it is called yoga. This is translated also as union, meaning a union with the Supreme Being, or as it is otherwise put, the object of spiritual knowledge is the Supreme Being. Shall I keep going a bit more?
Let's wait, let's stop, and before we go on to the divisions of the yoga, because it brings up, a good point about trying to culture ourselves just for our own use. I mean, there's nothing wrong with reading this, but doing this, but if we're only focused on that, like as Theosophy said, like, what is going to be your aim of focus? For what are you going to be thinking about most of your life? Are you going to go from one subject to another subject, trying to learn this outwardly, and what is that actually doing for ourselves? Is it really helping us and keeping us happy? It seems like it's more of a distraction for many people from going from one thing to another thing. Wesley.
Yeah, alluded to something that I can't remember if it's Judge or Crosby, but it's in the notes on the Bhagavad-Gita, where he explains the essential difference between Western psychology and Eastern psychology is that in the East, ethics are at the core of the psychological worldview. In the West, it's all about me. It's about how I feel and the wrongs done or my trauma, and all of that is all focused on our personal nature. And this was written, of course, before Jung and before Freud and all of that. But you only see it more if you look at not so much Jung, but certainly Freud and others in Western psychology. It's all about the personal nature, and it's not about how I can be useful to others. It's about what's good for me personally. And I suppose from our personal perspective, that's fine. Except as you were making that distinction, and he's going to talk about it here, but the distinction between Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga is really profound. But it goes back to, I think it's Crosby in the 8th chapter of the Gita Notes that explains that, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
I continue on what said, because I think that's one of the golden threads that we find that runs through, the truth in all religions, is that psychologically, the most well-being is going to be through service and through what you do for other people, and how healthy maybe the culture around you is going to be a big part of your mental health. And so, that's like two different takes. One is the Western is always the symptoms, and the Eastern view is the actual root.
Yeah, big distinction.
I also think it's amazing that in 1888, when people were reading this, it was very likely to the vast majority of people reading this, the very first time they heard the word yoga, it's amazing.
Okay, so let's continue. So now we're going to get into the sort of the meat of what he's talking about in this focus and concentration. So anyone else want to continue reading? This term is concentration. Okay, I'll read it.
I help you,
You okay?
yeah.
Okay.
Unless I nail once a week for practice, you know. Okay, this term is concentration. There, right?
Yes.
In the Indian books, it is called yoga. This is translated also as union, meaning a union with the supreme being, or Gita, or it is otherwise put, the object of a spiritual knowledge is the supreme being. There are two great editions of yoga found in the ancient books, and they are called Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. Hatha Yoga is a practical mortification of the body by means of which certain powers are developed. It consists in the assumption of certain postures that aid the work and certain kinds of breathing that bring on changes in the system, together with other devices. It is referred to in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita as some devotees sacrifice the sense of hearing and the other senses in the fires of restraints. Some other objects of sense, such as sound, in the fires of the senses. Some also sacrifice inspiration of breath in expiration, and expiration in inspiration, by blocking up the channels of inspiration and expiration, desires of retaining the breath. Others, by abstaining from food, sacrifice life in their life.
Yeah, continue for the whole page.
Okay. In various treatises, these methods are set forth in detail. And there is no doubt at all that by pursuing them, one can gain possession of sundry abnormal powers. There is risk, however, especially in the case of people in the West, where experienced gurus or teachers of these things are not found. This risk consists in this, that while an undirected person is doing according to the rules of Hatha Yoga, he arouses about him influences that do him harm, and he also carries his natural functions to certain states now and then when he are stopped for a while, but having no knowledge of the matter may go on beyond that and produce injurious effects. Then again, Hatha Yoga is a difficult thing to pursue, and one that must be pushed to the point of mastery and success. Few of our Western people are by nature fitted for such continuous and difficult labor on the mental and astral planes. Thus, being attracted to Hatha Yoga by the novelty of it and by the apparent pay that it offers, is invisible physical results. They begin without knowledge of the difficulty, and stopping after a period of trial, they bring down upon themselves consequences that are wholly undesired. The greatest objection to it, however, is that it pertains to the material and semi-material roughly to the body, and what is gained through it is not out there.
So yeah, he's explaining, that you can, practice and gain some abnormal powers, and people, we see this today, and there's so many, Kundalini yoga studios and practices, different yoga. And I don't know how much they are going to beyond just exercise. I've never been to any, but if they start to go into trying to raise Kundalini, on their own without really properly knowing. It's very dangerous and could, result in death ultimately.
Sure.
So he's, outlining that it's definitely a risk to practice this. And it's very hard. I mean, even, some doing some practices of myself of not hatha yoga by doing some like Chinese exercises and different rituals, trying to teach those to people. It's even the simplest one, people don't spend the time to learn. and they're like this pretty, easy one. So, going through all of this, it like really, it consists of constant practice. And so many people aren't even in persistence, aren't really willing to do that. Yes.
We talked about, he arouses about hidden influences that do him harm. Is that, I mean, is that elementaries or is it more physical, like,
Yeah, I would say, like, that's the warning of the voice of the silence, the lower cities. So these lower powers with the lower elementals around them, yeah, which, if we don't have them under control, just like we were talking about, we enter into this astral realm, we can be, and it's the hall of learning, and it says, be careful because you can get mesmerized
Sure.
by these things. You can start getting mesmerized by, maybe you have like some little, intuition or some little power that, you get mesmerized, and that's what you only focus on and not focus on going further toward this wisdom.
yeah, it stands to me that that's why in Buddhism, when, they're also probably in Hinduism and Vedanta, like when a teacher is going to like teach you a form of yoga or a yoga, there's going to be some form of an initiation or empowerment before, so as to, make sure you're ready and prepare you for that, and the lineage is there, and it kind of establishes the importance or even sanctity of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the judge indicates in the introduction to the yoga aphorisms of the Tantra. If
Yeah.
we're really interested in yoga and concentration, that Potential's aphorisms are probably the best place to start.
So good.
Yeah, I knew a woman several years ago who had been teaching yoga for about 30 years. She was fairly young even at that time, but her whole approach was based on potential. But what was interesting was that she didn't make as hard and fast a distinction between Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga as is made here. And I remember having conversations in a class, something like this, about that. And she just said, well, some of the things that are pointed out here, restraining the senses and so forth, she says, I wouldn't have anybody do any of those. They're not helpful. So she did, some of what she did was kind of like exercising. She had a pretty good sense for who she could teach and who she couldn't. And those she couldn't, she'd give exercises to. Not breathing exercises, just exercises.
Yeah.
And they walked away thinking that they were learning yoga. She had it pretty well figured out. And, Theosophy gave her a different perspective on it. But she still had a studio and she charged people for what she was teaching them. But it was really interesting to see that she didn't make that hard and fast distinction as if it were something that one could make, but from her perspective, it was a holistic thing. And so she knew who to include and who not to. I don't know how she knew that, but she seemed to, because she read all of these cautions, and it was interesting how well she had done. She was in very good health and attributed to the yoga. So it may well be that there are people that take to this more naturally. Yoga was something really new in Judge's time. I mean, there just wasn't going to go west. Patanjali, I don't think, when did it get translated? About that time, you know, this is 1888, I think, this article. So I can't say for sure that a lot has changed, but certainly maybe some things have changed. Her perspective was, you start with the aphorisms of Patanjali and go from there, you know.
Yeah,
And if you can't understand those, it's about the third section or so, third or fourth book, where it's mentioned, the postures or breathing or something. It's almost an aside to the other things.
right, yeah.
It's usually meditation.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and it's a lot of work to get to that point, and I think honestly, most people are, I'm stuck in the first chapter. So it's just, you know, there's only, but it's a real treatise for those that, you know, if you don't have a teacher,
Yes.
I make Judge the teacher on that one. And there are other, you know, translations of Patanjali that are also very, very helpful, Timely and others, Charles Johnston. And they give a different perspective, but Judge is just spot on. Yes, he really sees it, I think.
Roberto,
Well, we went through some of the dangers of the Hatha Yoga, right?
right,
Then at the very beginning, he gave us what is going to follow, Raja Yoga, because in one phrase, it says about yoga that as it otherwise should be put, the object of the spiritual knowledge is a supreme being. And of course, each one has to, you know, investigate what really is a supreme being within ourselves. But that should be the object, not personal gaining, not gaining powers like you mentioned, Kundalini. It has to be totally away from any personal gaining, because that's where the dangers come. And therefore, we're going to get into the real Raja Yoga, which is the object on also the meditation. You know, what is the object of your meditation?
right.
You know, gaining something for yourself, or you want to be better person, you want to. The idea is to work with boundaries. The object of the spiritual knowledge is the supreme being. That's what I yoga.
Yes.
Well, the thing with, like Rusty pointed out, the thing with Hatha Yoga on a lot of levels, it's just a good exercise and healthy practice. It's energetic. But when you get into the higher aspects, that's when the dangers. You know, so many people use yoga as a way, instead of exercising with weight machines and stuff. And that has health benefits on this time. But if you're trying to raise states of consciousness, then that's, you know, that's where Raja Yoga gets in. And some of Hatha Yoga, but that's where that's why they're listing some of the dangers of Hatha Yoga. Because you're starting from a different perspective.
It seems to me that you would have to learn them together if you're doing it responsibly.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're first trying to get your physical body to a certain state, there's two ways of looking at it. You can get your physical body to a certain state so that then you can try and raise your consciousness to a spiritual level. You can try and get your spiritual consciousness awareness developed. If your spiritual consciousness awareness is developed, how to heal your physical mechanism is going to be natural, because you're going to know specifically what your physical nature needs, as opposed to, not saying Hatha Yoga is completely bad. It has physical things. It's like if you go swimming, you know, for an hour every day or an hour every other day, you're going to have physiological benefits that are going to last for your whole life. And that's going to give you a lot of benefits. It's going to lessen depression. It's going to make you healthier so you don't get sick as often. All those physiological things, you're still going to benefit from. if you're trying to raise your conscious level to really know who you are, how you fit into the framework of existence, and what your purpose is as this personality, if you go on that route, then Raja Yoga is going to lead you to be more effective in the purpose that you're here for. So and you know, the actual physiology of it is different. Because with Hatha Yoga, you start at the lowest chakra and try and raise it. With Raja Yoga, or the heart doctrine, you start with the heart and be aware of that which you are, or Ishwara. In the voice of the silence, it talks about Kundalini and the process that the energy will travel, and it focuses on the heart. But you know, if you never study philosophy and you just go by common folk phrases, people say, "Oh, they're hard-hearted. They have a warm heart. They're green with envy. You know, they're a cold soul." All those things are the windows are the eyes of the soul. We have so many phrases that point to a certain knowledge that people transfer through generations of this aspect of an inner nature and how to connect to it. So if you start from your true nature, your compassionate nature, then Kundalini is going to go it's going to go through all the chakras, but it's going to go in a different way. So that's kind of the physiological, psychological difference between Hatha Yoga and each. You know, if you study the centers, each center controls a certain emotional nature of your history, and it has certain physiological functions. So depending on what path that energy takes is going to be how you awaken, or what you have to deal with after you awaken. It's another way to look at it.
There's, this introduction to Patanjali's, it describes also describes the differences, and what he says, Patanjali's rules compel the student not only to acquire a right knowledge of what is and what is not real, but also to practice all virtues. And while results in the way of psychic development are not so immediately seen as in the case of the successful practitioner of Hatha Yoga, it is infinitely safer and is certainly spiritual, which Hatha Yoga is not. In Patanjali's aphorisms, there is some slight allusion to the practices of Hatha Yoga, such as postures, each of which is more difficult than those preceding, and retention of breath. But he distinctly says that mortification and other practices are either for the purpose of extenuating certain mental afflictions or for the more easy attainment of concentration of mind. In Hatha Yoga practice, on the contrary, the result is psychic development at the delay or expense of the spiritual nature. These last main practices and results may allure the Western student, but from our knowledge of inherent racial difficulties, there is not much fear that many will persist in them. This book is meant for sincere students, and especially for those who have some glimmering of what Krishna meant when in the Bhagavad-Gita he said that after a while spiritual knowledge grows up within and illuminates with its rays all subjects and objects. Students of the mere forms of Sanskrit who look for new renderings or laborious attempts at altering the meaning of the words and sentences will find nothing between the covers.
I agree with that. In the Yoga Sutras, doesn't he talk about, I can't remember what they're called, niyama, or I can't remember what but virtues he talks about. That's really important. But I also believe that it is possible to mix the two. If you have the right kind of teacher, you could utilize some aspects of Hatha Yoga and then let it lead you to Raja Yoga. Because I think it's possible. There's something called shock karma. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. That's where you cleanse. You go through a lot of cleansing. There's different types that are sort of gross. I don't even want to talk too much about it, but it's real, it's legitimate, and they knew about it a long time ago, and some of the yogis would use that. They would, and that cleansing is a big part of Hatha Yoga. You won't find that in Raja Yoga at all. And it cleanses parts of your body, and it also helps the physical aspects of the Hatha Yoga. I mean, if you look at Americans, we need physical exercise really badly. So I would think that if it was properly mixed, the good aspects of Hatha Yoga, which would include cleansing and the postures, and sort of wear your body in a session, wear your body out so that your mind doesn't have to think about your body anymore, and it's easier to get into a meditative state to reach Raja Yoga. That's what I would say. But unfortunately in America, we take these things and we turn them into industries and fads. So what they've done is they've taken the physical aspects out of Hatha Yoga, and it's just a fad now. And everybody has a yoga pants on, and they have a yoga mat, and it's this whole culture thing.
I think
Got no
most of
hands,
what
got the mat,
yoga,
I'm in yoga.
I think most of Western, what they call yoga, is what in the East would be seen as preparations for meditation, exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's things to do, so
Yeah, that's what
meditation is
Friend would do.
more innate. Yeah, yeah.
With all externals, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's no fancy breathing or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it's like, it's great, it's cool, it makes you get in shape and everything like that, but it also seems like a bit of a wasted opportunity. You don't meditate.
Right. So at the end of the postures is when you should go into the Raja meditation, because then your body has been used and it's easier to be still. But a big part of Hatha Yoga is something called Shat Karma, Shatkarma, and it is a series of different cleansings. The human body needs to be cleansed. It really does. So that is definitely something you will find in Hatha Yoga that you won't find in Raja Yoga.
Could I say something about the postures? In Hatha Yoga, there are a lot of postures and so much, one can be a gymnast and probably do well at it. But in Raja Yoga, the postures, I think, are more mental postures. How you're approaching the world, how you're approaching your relationships, how you're approaching yourself, and what is your idea of the Supreme Self, whatever that is.
Yes.
And so I think when you read postures, especially in Patanjali, I think we need to be careful that he's really talking about mental postures. There's actually very little Hatha Yoga, although it's certainly alluded to and mentioned in Patanjali or in Raja Yoga. Yeah, so just a thought on that idea.
That's a great idea.
Postures that, it's our mental balance. And in fact, in the ancient world, the term heart often means the mind.
Yeah.
You get that in the translations of the Gita. And sometimes it's translated, same word in the Sanskrit. So I've been told by people that know the words in Sanskrit. I don't know them myself, but often you'll find where even in Judge's rendition, he'll render it mind some places, other places he'll render it as heart. And remember, in the ancient world, there was at least popularly, the idea that intelligence came from the heart. This is where your mind is. This is where you're focused. That's useful for, the rest of the functions of your body, but your real awareness is here. You go back to what you said about Raja Yoga. Start from here. And it eventually affects the entire permanent nature.
Yes.
Not just our acquired nature. And that's kind of the distinction I think that Judge makes.
It's not just putting you in a good mood for the day, but
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if it's all about a good mood for the day, well, give me 2 cups of coffee and I'm good. It's not enough. Eventually it wears thin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, because you can be practicing, Hatha Yoga, cleansing, doing other, but then if you're just like, yelling at your neighbors and people,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, it's not gonna work. That's why you do Raja Yoga after you do all that. You
Well, yeah, but you could, I feel like you could start with Raja Yoga. That's what they're kind of alluding to, is that that's gonna, there's nothing wrong with doing Hatha Yoga, but for, exercising and stuff, but I think the main start should be the Raja Yoga, the mental posture, mental attitude in everyday life, like in this, okay, so this next paragraph, that starts the Bhagavad-Gita, it's on the. I'm not gonna read it all, but it says like, this means that Hatha Yoga practice represents a mere sacrifice itself, whereas the other kind is the ambrosia arising from the sacrifice or the perfection of spiritual cultivation. And that leads to nirvana. This means the means for attaining the perfection of spiritual cultivation are found in Raja Yoga, or as we shall term it for present culture of concentration. So, getting that calm or whatever desired from Hatha Yoga, really the ultimate, calm or ultimate
is Raja.
is Raja Yoga.
That's why I say the Hatha first, then your body is tired and easier to sit still. And
I
then
think it probably depends on the person.
I think it's two different systems.
And that would be a good idea.
I think what she's saying too, that mental positioning.
Yes, that is important.
Before you start anything,
It is.
Right.
so.
It is.
The idea is like players. We start from universals
Right.
rather than particulars, because we can get lost with particulars.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
Raja Yoga is, universal is, Raja Yoga is Theosophy, really, in essence. And so we deal with universals and then apply that into the particulars.
It's really beautiful in the paragraph before how it talks about sacrificing your senses. And we don't think that much about that. We think of sacrifice as a bird or, survival or something like that. But that's amazing to think that like you could sacrifice your senses, and that's you can get this ambrosia from sacrificing your stuff and your by just through meditation is what it's talking about. But it's like it's really nice to hear it that way, because sometimes in meditation we get a little stuck on the discipline of it instead of what we're really doing. And I think that's a good way to remember that. It's like I'm sacrificing being awake and working right now for something. Like, yeah.
Keep in mind too, what Judge is referring to as the really stringent Hatha Yoga practices were done and probably still done extensively in India. So you get a yogi that sits in one position, not just for a day or a week or a month.
Yeah.
They stay there for years. They'll stand on one foot.
Your muscles will atrophy.
They will
Yeah.
amplify in place. There's just all kinds of things. The Buddha had to fight that tendency when he was seeking the truth. He found all these practices people were doing, these monks in the forest.
Could have been the greatest black magician that ever lived.
Well, they were doing all these things to their
Aesthetics.
physical bodies, all these sacrifices and so forth. And he tried them. He got nowhere. He tried to have the yoga first, and he didn't get any place. He had to kind of go the other the other discipline.
That's not really what I'm talking about though, but yeah, you're right.
But,
You're right.
I think you make a good point. If one thought of Hatha Yoga as relaxation, as exercise, keep in mind, say in Pythagoras' school, back 6th century BC, way before, 100 years or more before Plato, 3 things were required for anybody to even approach the school. You had to be proficient in gymnastics, mathematics, and music. Why? Your body had to be in good shape because he's going to make you work. The mathematics, you had to have the ability to think rationally. And music, because you had to think harmonically. So you know those things. And then you got into school. Remember the first thing that they made you do? You shut up for 5 years. You knew all that stuff, didn't matter. That was just to get you in the door.
Plato was
So that was
rest. Yeah.
so Plato was So yes, athleticism, health. Remember the Greeks regarded the human form highly. Plato, I think, kind of shared that from Socrates, but they were in good health physically already. So they've done the stretching.
Yeah.
You could say they've done the exercise. But Pythagoras said, no, if you're going to be here, you have to be prepared to start. And that was just sort of the baseline. That wasn't teaching them anything. And after 5 years, you learned a little bit more. So
just everybody, you know, especially in movies and stuff, glorify the Spartans, but historically, the second highest virtue in the Spartan society, like what you're talking about, wasn't physical. Second to physical prowess was singing. Was the ability to sing? Like, what's so treasured?
the music, yeah.
I just want to say something.
Go ahead.
One of the first things that they did when you came to the Pythagoras school is they would put out a gigantic feast. And this was so they would teach them how to have self-control. They would bring the feast out in the morning when everyone was hungry, and then they would just take it away.
That would be a bummer.
Yeah, that's good.
So I should have done at the beginning of this.
You know, the key thing that he's gonna get into in this article with Hatha Yoga is pointing out, like, Justin brought up the idea of sacrificing the senses. And Judge is gonna point out that we have inner senses within our inner nature. And by blocking the outer sensations of the senses, then we can slowly disentangle our inner nature from our semi-physical and physical nature. And that's really what Hatha Yoga is trying to get us to do. It's trying to consciously experience in our soul, body, and mind, so that we know how to interact and extract from a physical body.
Yes.
And that's that body that we develop by these practices, just like Hatha Yoga is developing and energizing the physical body. The Hatha Yoga regimen is going to help us energize and build the senses on our inner body of Raja Yoga.
Yes.
Build those inner senses,
Yes.
which is our soul nature.
Yes.
And until we can do that, we can't interact on the higher planes of existence. We can't enter into the Akashic realm until we have the vehicle to hold that consciousness and bring it down to our physical.
Yeah.
We experience in there all the time, but we're not conscious of it. And so what the Raja Yoga is trying to get us to do is to be able to, just like when we leave our car, when you leave your car, your consciousness goes to wherever you go. You're not still locked in the car trying to experience this class. But we have so little experience in that state of consciousness that we just don't know it. And when we get an intuition, or we get what we feel is like a internal warning, or we feel like, you know, I haven't talked to that person in a year for some reason, they've been on my mind all week, I better call them. All that is little glimpses of this inner connection that we have, that we should be able to develop and be more aware of it, just like we're aware on this plane. And that's what's really interesting when we get to it. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but he explains it really basically when he's talking about extracting these senses from the outer senses, so then you can sense on these inner planes and make judgments as to what is real and what is relatively real and what is masquerading as like an elementary or an elemental or a thought projection that is just a thought. It's not really a being. But until we have those senses developed where we're watching it and we're listening to it, then we're just not experiencing it. It's like you walk into a room and it's dark, but you know where you're going, so you go and you grab something, someone comes in behind you, turns on the switch, and you look There's 100 cockroaches out there. Now I'm gonna freak out. In the dark, you didn't know that.
Didn't matter.
Okay, well, let's at least try to start getting into the Raj Yoga with this next paragraph. Colin, you want to read that?
First read.
Okay, so it starts when concentration is perfected. We are in a position.
Okay, I got it.
On page 34, the middle paragraph.
When concentration is perfected, we are in a position to use a knowledge that is ever within reach, but which ordinarily eludes us continually. That which is usually called knowledge is only an intellectual comprehension of the outside, visible forms assumed by certain realities. Take what is called scientific knowledge of minerals and metals. This is merely a classification of material phenomena and empirical acquisition. It knows that certain minerals and metals are used. It knows what certain minerals and metals are useful for and what some of their properties are. Gold is known to be pure, soft, yellow, and extremely ductile. And by a series of accidents, it has been discovered to be useful in medicine and the arts. But even to this day, there is a controversy not wholly settled as to whether gold is held mechanically or chemically in crude ore. Similarly with minerals. The crystalline forms are known and classified. And yet a new theory has arisen, coming very near to the truth, that we do not know matter in reality in this way, but only apprehend certain phenomena presented to us by matter and variously called as a phenomenon, altar, gold, wood, iron, stone, and so on. But whether the minerals, metals, and vegetables have further properties that are only to be apprehended by still other and undeveloped senses, science will not admit. Passing from inanimate objects to the men and women about us, this ordinary intellectual knowledge aids us no more than before. We see bodies with different names and of different races, but below the outer phenomena of our everyday intellect will not carry us. But below the outer phenomena, our everyday intellect will not carry us. This man is supposed to have a certain character assigned to him after experience of his conduct, but it is still only provisional, for none of us is ready to say that we know him either in his good or his bad qualities. We know there is more to him than we can see or reason about, but what we cannot tell. It eludes us continually, and when we turn on to contemplate ourselves, we are just as ignorant as we are about our fellow man. Out of this has arisen an old saying, every man knows what he is, but no one knows what he will be.
Now just read the next little paragraph.
There must be in us a power of discernment, the cultivation of which will enable us to know whatever is desired to be known. That there is such a power is affirmed by teachers of occultism, and the way to acquire it is by cultivating concentration.
Lama Karma calls it single pointedness.
Yes.
Well, yeah, there's single points, there's all different types of meditations, but, and all different roads to ultimately then get to this acquiring, connecting, totally identifying with this inner part of ourselves and work then bringing that to our, present mental state and then enacting that out.
Can we cultivate concentration right now without sitting down meditating? I think so.
Well, you can do it in anything, in today's day and age, like multitasking is looked at as a positive thing, but I will, it's when you're doing one thing, you're actually just focusing on that one thing and not trying to think of all these different things. You get a sense of calm and you get a sense of focus, So anything that you could be doing, if you're just focusing on that, can be like a meditation. And Judge, mentions that in like, your daily meditation, and with the right posture of mind and, and anything that you do, it is a meditation.
We were in the war, we were, experimenting, we were training as a sniper. The sniper has to be a nice concentration. 1 second, not concentrating, and the object, you can lose the target.
That's the same with, there was that, the guy that was doing the free climbing, he didn't have ropes, they asked them, they said, well, you must have like, so, he's like, they questioned her, like, you must be like, you have so much adrenaline going through you. He's like, no, it's the opposite. He's like, I'm like, have to be calm and, just very like calm and focused. Otherwise, if there's adrenaline, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
It's like,
the pop word is zen. He's totally
Yeah,
zen, whatever,
yeah.
I mean, even in sports, they talk about being in the zone.
Right.
That's what that is. It's a single pointness. They get into that just concentration. Everything just flows. Feels like they're watching themselves just go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's like, run, like a runner or something like that,
That zone.
you're in the zone. But this kind of goes further and, like what Wes is saying, it matters what your mental posture is and every day focusing too. So if we're practicing these ideas constantly, like what are we filling our mind with, every day? If we're filling our mind with these ideas, with these virtues, then, our everyday, anything could be a meditation.
So I mentioned that because there's an interesting point over here. The power of discernment. They're speaking about the cultivation, the power of discernment. And these are, I mean, big words. How to learn how to discern.
Right.
So that means that through this practice, in our daily lives, as you mentioned, then we can cultivate this power of discernment, so we can get wise.
Well, which is different than judgment. Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
we make judgments every day with our just mental, our everyday mind. But that's based on our senses, how we're perceiving these outer, like we're just explained, we're looking at a person, we see, what they do, how they express themselves, and only on a very surface level do we really know who they are. But when we focus on the inner principle within us, we connect to the inner principle with other people and have more of an understanding of them.
We are basically, fighting the Kshetras. And
Which is what? Explain that.
here, the real life of the concentration. We are on the Kshetras, in the body of the power of Kurukshetra, day by day.
So Mahabharata?
Yeah.
That you? Yeah,
What's the term?
that's the Pandavas are fighting the,
But we're talking about this real,
yes,
right now, right here, right now.
Yes.
The battle.
yeah.
Well, the site is called Kurukshetra.
Yeah, it's the
The
first
plain-
one.
The side of the wars?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the battle is described in the Mahabharata, the great battle in the Bhagavad-Gita, which is internal. You're exactly
And we
right.
concentrate every day by day.
Yeah.
Yes.
That has to do with the lower nature of ourselves. All, like, we will describe the dangers of the hatha yoga. And so all these dangers is the battle in a way, because that's why it's dangerous. Guru means the lower nature, and Kshetra is the field, or what the battle is. But it means your own battle, the thing.
Wow.
Of the lower nature, But then we have the Pandus or Pandavas, which is the higher nation. And these sort of like part of this supreme being. Actually, the supreme being is above those two. Yeah, because these two natures that he's talking about, the lower nature in ourselves and the higher nature, and then we have the supreme being above that. Or Krishna, we can say Krishna. We were saying that earlier, you know, the Krishna within ourselves. So, anyway, I think that's what he was referring to, this battle over here.
Yes.
Well, there's another aspect to your question. You're talking about focus and develop concentration. And everyone is interconnected with people every day. There's people you work with, there's the family people, there's people you're gonna meet in the market. All day long, we interact with each other. Whether we know it or the other people know it, all those are all connected on one plane of mind. So this existence of mind can express through any individual at any time under the right karmic circumstances. When we interact with people, just the fact of focusing, paying attention to what they're saying, instead of thinking about all the other things we're normally thinking about, like how much traffic I got there, I gotta call this person in a minute, my phone's gonna ring, I wanna take that message, all the distractions that we're all pushed into all the time. If we just pay attention to the person we're talking to and genuinely listen and generally respond and don't react, that opens up that higher level of communication that we might not even know. It happens, if you think about it, it's happened in your life certain times where someone out of the blue would say something that triggered in you to either change a decision or it solved the problem that you've been trying to solve, or it led to something like a new apartment, a new job. You changed your major in school. You decided to look for a different group of friends to hang out. All these different things can happen spontaneously if we're just focused with the people we interact with. Because the people we interact with are karmically there at that moment, at that time. We're all connected. And it helps us open up to that. A few weeks ago, we were talking about, I forget where we were discussing, Louise brought up about a homeless person that was outside your apartment. And he'd been homeless on the street for a while, and then you told him he's not homeless, he just happens to be living on the street right now. And that little comment changed his life to the point where now he works as a manager in Vegas. Now, Louise had no idea that that comment was gonna completely get him off the street, but that was the comment that he felt he should tell the guy. And, you know, maybe other people have told him that a bunch of times. Maybe nobody talked to him at all. And he was just ignored. So I think that's part of this other daily aspect of Raja Yoga, not just when we're in a state of meditation, trying to extract from the eternal world and trying to tune into that. If we have the posture or the idea that can express through us at any time, and it can express through anybody else at any time, and we're focused, then we're opening up the possibility to being guided by that, whether we know it or not. And it's not like you have to be listening to every person for that little special clue as to what lottery number to play. It's just listening to people so that, because so many times when we're in a conversation and you're really focused, you understand and hear more than what the person's words are telling you. Because you understand their mannerisms, you understand that they're only telling you part of the story. There's so much understanding that we get when we interact with people if we're focused. But if you're only half focused, you miss most of it. You know, a lot of times if you ever have to like record people, maybe you're writing a paper, you have to record people, then you go back and you listen to the recording. A lot of times there's words left out of the sentence. you completely understood what they said. When we listen to the recording, they're skipping words and they're jumping to this idea and then they come back to the other idea. And it's on a tape recording and it's like, wow, I don't remember it being like that. But when you're in person and you're really paying attention, you pick up what they're saying by their mannerisms and the ideas that they're trying to express, sometimes better than the words expressed. So I think that's another aspect of, Roberto's question about focus, because yeah, we can concentrate and focus. The more we do that, the more it's going to be easier to do that when we're trying to meditate.
I think that's the same thing. It's like, people think, some people obviously Shakespeare stuff, but like, if you read Shakespeare for the first time and you're just like, what? But if you see skilled practitioners of the thespian arts do it, and they have the right intonations, the syllables, the structures of different dialects, they understand dialectic pentameter, all of a sudden you understand what they're talking about. It's not necessarily the language, but because of the skilled person that's presenting that language. So yeah, huge difference. Same thing with philosophy. I mean, me trying to read Spinoza, as far as someone that understands Spinoza telling me about it, is a totally different world. Because Spinoza, me reading it's just equations, and I'm like, but there's a lot of people that understand that. And it's, all about the monad that really speaks to me, but I need someone to filter it.
You can say, for example, it's just a drop in the yes, it's a drop in the water. But this drop make a difference, big difference in the direction.
Yes.
All right, well, I think we'll have to continue. Does anyone online have anything else?
Anybody online want to share anything?
I was just going to say, I'll just say good night because it's been a good meeting. I like it when we do the reading, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Anders on there?
Anders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
I had problems with connection, so now I'm at the lake.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Good morning in heaven there.
That looks beautiful, Anders.
Wow.
Hey,
It's a
Anders.
beautiful place. So I'm up here cooking.
So enjoy breakfast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for all the input.
Yeah, I want to go over the bathroom.
Yeah, he's got daylight there. How did that happen? It's like,
Thank you, Barbara. Have a good night.
It's like 5 a.m.
Bye.
oh, you're up.
Yes.
Okay.
Him and Ava sometimes.
What's up, boy?
come too.
Hey, Luis, how are you, brother?